The storm arrived like a predator. In the Alaskan interior, where the world ended in ice and isolation, a former Navy SEAL believed he had buried his past beneath the snow. Then Max stopped moving, his scarred body rigid, eyes locked on something in the white void that didn't belong. A man was tied to a tree, gagged and abandoned, left as bait in a game far deadlier than the cold. No rescue, no witnesses, just one fatal miscalculation. The people who staged this trap didn't know the man who would find it was built to turn hunted into hunter. What began as mercy would end in blood, where loyalty, survival, and redemption collided in the most unforgiving place on earth. Before we continue, subscribe to SOF Stories for raw cinematic accounts of Navy SEALs and Special Forces, where one moment can rewrite history. Winter had locked the Alaskan wilderness in a silence so complete it felt like pressure against the skull. Wind didn't howl here. It carved, stripping warmth from flesh and erasing landmarks until the forest became a maze without markers, without mercy. William Grice had chosen this emptiness deliberately. At 35, his body still carried the architecture of war, broad shoulders beneath layers of tactical winter gear, muscles that had lost their sharp edges but retained their function. His face was hidden behind tactical goggles and a helmet, but beneath it lay features hardened by decisions no man should have to make. Dark hair cropped close by habit, a jaw set in permanent vigilance, eyes the color of winter steel, always scanning, always calculating, trained to see threats before they materialized. He had been part of naval special warfare for over a decade, his body conditioned to operate in conditions that broke ordinary men. But it was a roadside explosion in a desert halfway around the world, one that turned two of his teammates into names on a memorial wall that fractured something deeper than bone. Since that day, William avoided proximity to others, not from anger, but because silence felt safer than the weight of another life in his hands. His cabin sat deep in the forest, miles from the nearest maintained trail, built with the precision of someone who understood that shelter wasn't comfort, it was survival. The structure was small, reinforced, stocked with supplies rotated methodically. No neighbors, no interruptions, just the wind, the snow, and the quiet that let him forget he had once been responsible for men who trusted him with their lives. The blizzard warnings had been broadcasting for hours. By evening, the world outside turned into a wall of horizontal white, the kind of storm that erased footprints in seconds and killed through exhaustion rather than violence. William secured the cabin with practiced efficiency, checking shutters, stacking firewood, testing the generator. He didn't fear nature. He understood it. Max didn't. The German shepherd had been resting by the wood stove when his entire demeanor shifted. Max was massive, even by breed standards, nearly 90 pounds of muscle beneath a thick black and tan coat marked by a pale scar along his left flank, a souvenir from an IED detection gone wrong years ago. His ears snapped forward, head rising as if tugged by an invisible wire. Max had been a military working dog before medical discharge, trained to identify danger long before human perception could register it. Unlike William, Max still trusted his instincts without second-guessing them. His amber eyes fixed on the cabin door with an intensity that allowed no misinterpretation. The dog rose smoothly, pacing once toward the exit, then back to William, breath controlled but urgent. Max never barked unless there was no alternative. Instead, he communicated through stillness, through the angle of his body, through the tension radiating from every line. William felt it immediately, the shift inside his chest, the recalibration from isolated hermit to operational mindset. It was a switch he thought he'd left behind, but the years had only buried it, not removed it. He layered thermal gear over his base clothing, pulled on his heavy camouflage-patterned ballistic vest, grabbed a high-powered flashlight and coiled rope, and opened the door into chaos.
The cold was a physical assault. Wind tore at exposed areas, biting through insulation, carrying ice crystals that felt like broken glass against skin. Visibility dropped to arm's length. Max was already moving, head low, powerful legs driving through snowdrifts with mechanical efficiency. William followed, each step calculated, knowing that losing direction out here meant dying out here. His thoughts narrowed, shedding the clutter of guilt and isolation, replaced by the crystalline focus he hadn't felt since he walked away from the teams. This was movement with intent. This was forward engagement. They pushed beyond the familiar perimeter, deeper into the tree line where the wind screamed differently, funneling between trunks with a sound like distant machinery. Max slowed, then veered hard northeast, stopping beneath a towering pine whose branches sagged under the weight of accumulated snow. William's flashlight beam swept low first, tactical habit, then tracked upward, and his breath stopped despite the cold discipline trained into him. A man was bound to the tree.
The man was dressed in a dark, olive-drab flight suit, military patches visible on both shoulders even beneath the accumulating snow. His wrists were bound behind him with heavy rope that looped multiple times around the tree trunk, professional knots that weren't meant to slip. A strip of black tape covered his mouth, stark against pale skin already showing the early stages of hypothermic discoloration. His eyes were open, tracking William's approach with the kind of controlled awareness that spoke of training, of men who had learned to operate at the edge of endurance. William swept the perimeter with his flashlight, muscle memory taking over. The beam caught disturbed snow in a pattern too deliberate to be random. Boot prints, multiple sets, leading away in different directions before the storm consumed them. This wasn't a dumping ground. This was theater. The placement was intentional, the victim positioned where someone passing through might find him, but not easily, not quickly. This was bait dressed up as tragedy. Max circled the tree once, nose working the frozen air, body language shifting from alert to aggressive. He'd found something else, some scent marker William's limited senses couldn't process. The dog's message was clear. They weren't alone out here, not really. Somewhere in the white chaos, something was watching. William moved forward anyway. He'd stopped making the safe choice years ago. He reached the pilot and pulled the tape free in one motion, then pressed 2 fingers against the man's throat. The pulse was there, faint but steady, the body doing what it was designed to do even as the cold worked to shut it down. The man's lips moved, cracked and bleeding, but no sound came out at first. His jaw worked against the stiffness. "Trap," the pilot finally managed, voice barely more than a rasp. "It's a trap." "I know," William said, already working the knots. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency despite the cold, feeling the rope's construction, recognizing the pattern. Military training, same as his. "How long have you been out here?" "Hours, maybe 4. Lost track." The man's eyes focused more clearly now that hope had entered the equation. "They wanted me found, wanted whoever found me, compromised." William cut through the last section of rope with his knife, catching the pilot as his legs gave out. The man was heavier than he looked, dead weight against William's shoulder, muscles too cold to function properly. "Can you walk?" "Not fast, not far." The pilot gritted his teeth, forcing his legs to remember their purpose. "My name's Rogers Buford. I'm a transport pilot out of Elmendorf. They took me 2 days ago." "Save it." William shifted Buford's weight, taking most of it across his shoulders in a modified fireman's carry. "Talk when we're somewhere that won't kill us." The trek back was brutal. Snow had risen to waist level in places, each step requiring full body effort, legs driving through resistance that seemed designed to stop forward progress. William's breath came in controlled bursts, visible even in the darkness, each exhale a small measure of core temperature lost to the void. He kept his eyes on Max, trusting the dog's navigation more than his own spatial memory. The storm had erased landmarks, turned familiar terrain into alien geometry. Buford's weight increased as his body gave in to the warmth of another human, muscles relaxing into unconsciousness. William adjusted his grip, calculating distance, fuel reserves, the mathematics of exposure.
He'd carried wounded men before, across deserts and through urban ruins, but never through conditions like this. Disorientation was as deadly as exposure. One wrong turn meant they'd be found in spring, frozen in mid-step, another cautionary tale about underestimating the north. Max stopped twice, head swiveling, ears tracking sounds William couldn't hear beneath the wind's constant assault. Each time, William stopped too, waiting, weapon hand free despite the burden on his shoulders. But nothing emerged from the white. Not yet. The cabin materialized like a promise, its dark outline solidifying against the storm. William kicked the door open and carried Buford inside, lowering him near the wood stove with care that belied the urgency. Max entered last, shaking snow from his coat in a violent cascade before taking up position by the door, still on duty, still watching. William stripped the pilot's outer layers, checking for frostbite, assessing damage with the clinical detachment of a field medic. Fingers and toes showed early signs, tissue pale and unresponsive, but nothing catastrophic yet. He wrapped Buford in thermal blankets and positioned him where radiant heat could do its work without burning tissue that forgot to regulate temperature.
It took 20 minutes before Buford's eyes opened again, consciousness returning in stages. He tried to sit up, instinct overriding reason, but William pressed him back down with minimal force. "Stay still. Your body's still figuring out it's alive." Buford nodded, jaw clenched against shivers that came in waves. "They left me out there on purpose, wanted it to look like exposure, like I wandered off and got lost." His voice was stronger now, anger providing fuel. "I'm a cargo pilot, been flying northern logistics routes for 8 years. 3 weeks ago, I noticed discrepancies in fuel manifests, loads that didn't match consumption, supply drops that weren't on official schedules." William poured hot coffee from the thermos he kept ready, handed it over. "You started asking questions. Worse, I started documenting." Buford wrapped both hands around the cup, absorbing its warmth. "Black market fuel extraction. Someone's been skimming off military supplies, selling it through civilian channels. Not small amounts, industrial scale, and it's coordinated, which means someone inside is facilitating it. And they found out you knew. They picked me up outside my housing unit, professional, no hesitation, drove me 12 hours north, tied me to that tree and left." Buford met William's eyes. "They told me someone would find me eventually. That's when they'd know who else was a problem." William absorbed this, mind already running scenarios, calculating threat vectors. "They're not just watching you, they're watching whoever intervenes." "Which means they know you're here." Buford's expression hardened. "I'm sorry, I didn't want this, but you saved my life. That makes you a target now." Max's head snapped toward the door before the sound registered. A low, sustained growl built in his chest, not loud, but absolute in its certainty. William was moving before conscious thought caught up, weapon drawn, body positioned between the door and Buford. He killed the interior lights with one hand, plunging the cabin into darkness, broken only by the wood stove's glow. His eyes adjusted within seconds, trained response taken over. He moved to the window, staying low, using the frame for cover while scanning the exterior. Nothing moved in the visible radius, just snow and wind and the dark spaces between trees. But Max didn't make mistakes about this. Something was out there, close enough to register as threat, disciplined enough to stay outside visual range. William shifted to the door, examining it with his flashlight's red lens, the beam revealing what he should have checked before. A small device, barely larger than a matchbox, fixed to the door frame with military-grade adhesive. Wires ran down into the snow, disappearing beneath the threshold. An explosive trap. Simple, effective, triggered by pressure release. If he'd opened that door normally, the cabin would have been a crater. "They're here," William said quietly, moving back to Buford. "And they're not waiting anymore." The first shot came through the window without warning, glass exploding inward, the round punching through the space where William's head had been seconds before. He hit the floor, pulling Buford down, returning fire through the shattered window in controlled bursts. Muzzle flashes lit up the tree line, multiple positions, coordinated fire discipline.
These weren't opportunistic criminals. These were professionals, hired competents operating with tactical precision. Max was already moving, low and fast, positioning himself at an angle where he could watch both entry points. His growl never stopped, a constant baseline of aggression held in check by training. William dropped his empty magazine, reloaded, mind processing patterns. 3 shooters minimum, possibly 4, working a suppression pattern designed to pin him down while another element maneuvered for advantage. They had night vision, ballistic plate carrier, extra magazines, thermal scope, and the M4 he'd kept clean and ready out of habit rather than expectation. Old habits, old tools, old William, rising to meet old problems. "Can you shoot?" he asked Buford. The pilot nodded, color returning to his face, adrenaline doing what warmth alone couldn't. "Qualified expert. Been a while, but I remember." William handed him a sidearm and 2 magazines. "Stay low. Command your space. Don't waste rounds on suppression. Make 'em matter." The cabin's walls shuddered as automatic fire raked the exterior, rounds punching through wood and insulation, tracking methodically from right to left. They were probing for position, mapping internal layout through elimination. William moved to the opposite wall, using the angle to peer through a gap in the shutters. 4 of them, maybe 5, spread in an arc, maintaining fields of fire that overlapped but didn't create crossfire risks. They were patient, disciplined, working to a plan that had been rehearsed. This wasn't their first siege, but it was their first mistake, thinking he'd stay trapped inside. William caught Max's attention with a hand signal, one the dog recognized instantly. The German shepherd shifted to the rear door, body coiled, waiting for release. William counted down from 3, then kicked the door open, while simultaneously suppressing through the front window.
Max exploded into the storm like a shadow with teeth, angling north where the perimeter was weakest. The mercenaries' attention fractured, one element turning to track the dog, and in that half-second of diverted focus, William was through the back door and moving. The cold hit him again, but this time he welcomed it. Clarity in the shock, focus in the discomfort. He moved along the cabin's exterior wall, staying low, using the structure for cover while his thermal scope painted the forest in shades of green. 3 signatures, tight formation, advancing on the front. 1 more to the east, trying to flank. William took the flanker first, 2 rounds center mass, professional and final. The man dropped without sound, and William was already repositioning, tracking the next threat. Max had engaged the Western shooter, chaos of motion and muffled screaming as trained aggression met amateur fear. The remaining 2 mercenaries adjusted fast, falling back to a position that gave them cover and overlapping sight lines. They were good, but William had spent years being better than good. He triggered a flashbang he'd positioned in the tree line earlier, old paranoia paying immediate dividends. The device detonated with concussive force, light and sound overwhelming senses in the 1-2 punch of sensory warfare. William moved through the aftermath, closing distance, his weapon tracking smooth arcs. The fight ended in seconds. Controlled bursts, center mass, no hesitation. Silence returned, broken only by wind and the distant crack of stressed trees. William retrieved Max, checking the dog for injuries, finding none. They cleared the perimeter methodically, confirming what he already knew. 5 hostiles, all down, all permanent. Inside the cabin, Buford was standing, weapon ready, eyes wide but steady. Is it over? William looked at the bodies being consumed by snow, then at the encrypted radio he'd pulled from one of the mercenaries. The device was still active, still transmitting coordinates, still marking this location as mission critical. No, he said, this was just the first wave. William examined the encrypted radio in the dim light of the cabin, its screen displaying a cascade of coordinate strings and timestamps. The device was military grade, the kind that required authorization codes and cycled frequencies to avoid interception. But whoever had configured it had made one critical error.
They'd left the mission cache accessible, probably assuming none of their operators would be compromised. He scrolled through the data, piecing together the operational picture. A rendezvous point, coordinates placing it roughly 40 miles north at a canyon pass known for its narrow approaches. Timestamp showed movement scheduled for 0600 hours, less than 5 hours from now. Asset transfer, the message read, followed by a string of coded references that William recognized from his years in logistics interdiction. This wasn't just about silencing Buford. This was about moving product, completing a transaction that had already been paid for. "They're transporting the fuel tonight," William said, handing the device to Buford. "Everything you documented, everything they tried to kill you over, it's moving through that canyon in 5 hours." Buford studied the screen, his expression hardening with recognition. "That's Devil's Throat Canyon. Single road, sheer walls on both sides, no alternative routes. If you're moving heavy cargo north, that's your only option." He looked up. "It's also a perfect kill box if you know what you're doing." "Then we know what we're doing." William began loading gear into a tactical pack, selecting equipment with the efficiency of someone who'd packed for combat more times than he could count. Ammunition, medical supplies, communications equipment, everything designed for mobility and lethality. They think they eliminated the problem. We use that assumption against them. "We?" Buford stood, still unsteady but functional, driven by something beyond physical recovery. "You don't owe me this. You saved my life already. Walking into that canyon is—" "Not optional," William interrupted, his tone allowing no debate. "They came to my home. They tried to kill someone under my protection. That makes this personal." He met Buford's eyes. "And you were right about one thing. Walking away is no longer an option." They left the cabin 30 minutes later, moving through terrain that had tried to kill them hours before, but now served as cover. The storm had diminished to scattered snow, visibility improving enough to navigate by starlight and GPS. Max ranged ahead, a dark shape against white landscape, his path marked by the efficient economy of a working dog covering ground. William carried the weight of full combat load without complaint, body remembering rhythms it had practiced for years. Buford kept pace behind him, flight suit exchanged for winter gear stripped from one of the dead mercenaries, weapon held with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd qualified on range time but never expected to use it outside controlled conditions. Until now. They covered the 40 miles in just under 4 hours, pushing through snow and cold and the exhaustion that came from operating beyond normal human parameters. William navigated by terrain features memorized from topographic maps he'd studied when first moving to the region, treating the wilderness like enemy territory that demanded respect and reconnaissance. Every ridgeline, every frozen stream bed, every stand of trees became tactical considerations, advantages to be leveraged or obstacles to be avoided. Devil's Throat Canyon emerged from the darkness like a scar in the earth, walls rising 60 feet on either side, the road between them barely wide enough for 2 vehicles. The geometry was unmistakable, a natural choke point where numerical advantage meant nothing and position meant everything. William had fought in places like this before, urban corridors in distant countries where angles and elevation turned small forces into dominant ones.
He positioned Buford on the eastern ridge with the thermal scope and instructions that were simple and absolute. "Your overwatch. You see anything that isn't me or Max, you call it. Don't engage unless I'm compromised. Understood?" Buford nodded, settling into a position behind a rock outcropping that provided cover and sightlines. "What are you going to do?" "Command the space," William said, already moving down into the canyon itself, Max at his side. The road through the canyon was ice and packed snow, vehicle tracks visible from previous traffic, ruts worn into predictable patterns. William placed his assets with the precision of someone who understood that preparation was 90% of tactical advantage. Spike strips across the road at the narrowest point, camouflaged beneath a thin layer of snow.
Flashbang devices positioned in the rock walls, wired to remote detonators. Fields of fire calculated from 3 different positions, each one offering escape routes and overlapping coverage. By the time he finished, the canyon had transformed from geographic feature into weapon, every element leveraged toward a single outcome. He checked his watch. 15 minutes until scheduled arrival. He settled into position behind a boulder cluster that gave him cover and concealment, weapon rested on stable platform, breathing controlled to minimize movement. Max lay beside him, body pressed against William's leg, a point of contact that communicated readiness without sound. The dog's ears tracked every gust of wind, every shift in the environment, processing sensory information William's limited biology couldn't access. The convoy appeared exactly on schedule, headlights cutting through pre-dawn darkness, 3 heavy trucks moving in tight formation. The lead vehicle was military surplus, armored transport configured for cargo rather than personnel. The 2 following were civilian heavy haul, canvas-covered beds concealing whatever they carried. Conservative estimate placed at least 8 personnel, possibly 12 if they were running full security detail. William waited until all 3 vehicles were committed to the canyon, past the point where retreat was faster than advance. Then he triggered the spike strips. The lead truck's tires exploded in rapid sequence, shredded rubber and compressed air creating chaos in a space where control was everything. The driver fought physics and lost, vehicle slewing sideways across the narrow road, blocking forward movement. The trucks behind locked brakes, sliding on ice, one jackknifing slightly, the other slamming into the disabled leader with the crunch of metal and the hiss of ruptured cooling systems. William triggered the flashbangs before they could organize response, light and sound cascading through the canyon in overwhelming waves. Then he opened fire. Controlled bursts, center mass, targets selected by threat priority, eliminating drivers first, then anyone attempting to establish defensive position. Buford's weapon added to the chaos from above, rounds tracking anyone trying to use vehicles for cover. Max was motion in darkness, closing distance while attention was fractured, hitting exposed personnel with the kind of violence that broke decision-making into panic. The fight was brutal and brief. The mercenaries had weapons and training, but they'd been caught in a space where their advantages meant nothing. They tried to return fire, rounds sparking off stone, tracking toward muzzle flashes, but William had already displaced, moving to his secondary position, maintaining pressure from new angles. 3 minutes after the first shot, the canyon fell silent except for the idling engines and the groans of wounded men processing the reality of their situation. William cleared the vehicles methodically, Max moving with him, checking cargo while Buford maintained overwatch. The trucks were loaded exactly as expected, military fuel containers, hundreds of them, marked with designations that matched Buford's documentation. Conservative estimate placed the value in the millions, enough to fund operations for years, enough to make killing witnesses seem like reasonable business expense. The encrypted radio crackled with incoming transmission, voice tense with authority. Transport 1, report status. William keyed the transmit button. Transport 1 is compromised. So is your operation. Federal response inbound. If you're smart, you'll run. If you're connected, you'll lawyer up. Static. Then a different voice, calmer, calculating. You're the hermit, the one who found our pilot. You should have minded your business. Probably, but I stopped making smart choices a long time ago. He terminated the device's storage chip, pocketing evidence while Buford zip-tied the survivors with economical efficiency. The pilot worked with quiet competence, military training overriding civilian hesitation, doing what needed doing without complaint. The federal response team arrived 40 minutes later, helicopters announcing their approach with rotor wash that kicked up snow in blinding clouds. FBI and military CID, body armor and credentials, moving with the organized chaos of agencies who rarely coordinated this well. Someone high up had been paying attention, waiting for exactly this kind of break. William handed over the encrypted device and the survivors, providing a statement that was factual and minimal. He left nothing relevant, added nothing unnecessary. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with eyes that had seen too many operations go wrong, listened without interruption. "We've been tracking this network for 8 months, never had enough to move, too many layers of insulation. This breaks it open." She glanced at Buford, then back to William. "The pilot's testimony plus your evidence will roll up the entire chain, including the facilitator inside the supply command."
"Who?" Buford asked, the question they'd both been avoiding. The agent pulled up a file on her tablet, turned it so they could see. The face looking back was Army Logistics, field-grade officer, unremarkable except for the clearances and access that made him indispensable to operations like this. Someone trusted, someone invisible. "He's already in custody," the agent continued, "picked up 2 hours ago when we intercepted communications about the failed extraction. He's talking. They always talk when they realize the money's gone and the protection's evaporated." She looked at William with something approaching respect. "You did good work here, both of you." William said nothing, already moving back toward the tree line where Max waited. Buford caught up with him before he disappeared into the forest. "Thank you," the pilot said simply, "for all of it, for not walking away." "You would have done the same." William adjusted his pack, preparing for the long walk home. "Get somewhere warm, tell your story, make sure it means something." Buford nodded, understanding that some men didn't need gratitude, just acknowledgement that the work mattered. "What about you?" "I have a cabin that needs repairs," William said, "and a dog that needs breakfast." The walk back took longer than the approach, exhaustion settling into muscles that had operated beyond normal parameters for too long. But William didn't mind the pace, didn't fight the cold or the distance. He moved through familiar terrain with something approaching contentment, Max beside him, the weight of combat fading into the weight of simple forward motion. The cabin appeared through the trees, damaged but standing, windows shattered and walls scarred with bullet impacts. It would need work, would need time to restore, but it was still his, still the place he'd chosen when choosing anything at all felt impossible. Inside, he cleared the debris, boarded the broken windows, restored basic functionality to the systems that made survival possible. Max supervised from his position by the stove, accepting food and water with the dignified patience of a working dog that understood rest was earned, not given. William made coffee, strong and black, and sat in the chair that faced the door. His weapon lay within reach, old habits refusing to die, even when logic suggested the threat had passed. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like hiding. It felt like peace, the kind that didn't require running, didn't require isolation to maintain. He had moved toward danger instead of away from it, had taken responsibility for someone else's life and carried it through to completion. The guilt that had driven him into these woods was still there, would always be there, but it had shifted somehow, transformed from weight into foundation. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle this time, covering the scars in fresh white. Max's breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, and William allowed his own vigilance to soften just slightly, just enough. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was simply home. And that, finally, was enough.